Welcome back to Tipton Bros. Today, we'll be discussing the Edmond Post Office Massacre, its perpetrator, and the popularization of the term going postal. Before we begin, I must disclose that I am no expert and never claimed to be. Now, let's get into it. Born November 13th, 1941 in Watauga, Oklahoma, Patrick Henry Sherrill was the archetypal loner, socially inept, and remaining on the periphery of society. Patrick attended the University of Oklahoma for roughly 1 year before dropping out in favor of military service, enlisting in the United States Marine Corps in 1964. Sherrill would last 2 years, receiving an honorable discharge, December 29, 1966, exiting with a newfound interest in firearms. Living with his mother, Patrick would then join the 507th Tactical Fighter Group, part of the Air Force Reserve, at the Oklahoma City Area Air Base. His fondness for marksmanship grew, and in 1984, Sherrill would land the position of handgun instructor for the local Air National Guard. Patrick was a self-proclaimed small arms expert. Beyond this, he spent his time inside, tinkering with a ham radio. His mother passed away in 1978, but Sherrill continued to live in the modest 3-bedroom dwelling. There, he sunk further into isolation and earned himself the label of Peeping Tom. Local boys dubbed him Crazy Pat, and one neighbor, Gerald Cash, stated he'd be seen in this neighborhood walking around at all hours of the night, walking right across lawns. Cash continued, he'd stand and look at you, just stare at you, and not say a word. Patrick Sherrill sustained this outlandish behavior, peering into open windows and maliciously chasing children out of his yard without good reason. Pat was perpetually disliked and showed outward disdain towards others, being described as strange and his presence as unnerving. Quick to anger, Sherrill never held jobs for long, working as a radio salesman, electronics technician, and several other minimum wage occupations, frequently wearing military fatigues wherever he went. In the spring of 1985, Patrick Sherrill was hired as a reserve or relief letter carrier for the Edmond Post Office, a part-time position which he held for 16 turbulent months. Throughout Patrick's tenure as a carrier, his performance was poor, receiving complaints of misdirected mail, tardiness, and violent outbursts against fellow employees. Sherrill was badgered by management on multiple occasions, which devolved into shouting matches and Pat promising revenge through gritted teeth. Patrick H. Sherrill would reach a tipping point August 19, 1986, when supervisors Richard Esser Jr. and Bill Bland would reprimand him for the final time. Feeling belittled and seething with anger, Sherrill, in that moment, had already decided his cowardly fate. The following morning of August 20th, at around 7 a.m., Patrick Sherrill appeared in front of the single-story Edmond Post Office, wearing his uniform and clutching a mailbag slung over his shoulder, which concealed ammunition and 3 handguns. A .45 caliber Colt 1911, a Remington of the same pattern, and a Ruger Mark II 22 caliber target pistol. Sherrill entered the facility, instantly locating and killing Supervisor Richard Esser Jr. Unable to find the secondary target, Supervisor Bill Bland, who had fortunately overslept his shift, Patrick turned his attention to his coworkers, murdering 33-year-old Paul Michael Rockney. As the massacre began, roughly 100 employees were present in the 20,000-square-foot building, all of which desperately scrambled to conceal themselves or flee. Patrick temporarily pursued a group attempting to escape from a side exit, killing one man in the parking lot. Returning, he showed no emotion, briefly taking time to bolt the doors closed within his immediate vicinity. Sherrill then methodically strolled through the structure, checking in cubicles and beneath desks. Pat's movement was mechanical in nature, his face blank. Finding groups of 3 to 4, he would indiscriminately execute them, reportedly firing multiple shots at individuals who had already died. Repeating this process 3 to 4 times, Sherrill had now killed 14 people and wounded 6 in the span of approximately 15 minutes from 7 a.m. to 7:15. Patrick subsequently turned the gun on himself, pressing the muzzle to his forehead before pulling the trigger. Police arrived on scene in minutes. Employees stayed hidden. Specifically, two in a broom closet, and another in the stamp vault. For nearly an hour, the police tried to communicate with Cheryl, calling the internal landline and shouting through a bullhorn. Dead silence was the response, and at 8:30 a.m., 1 hour and 30 minutes after the shooting began, the Edmond SWAT team would storm the post office. It immediately became evident Patrick Sherrill was dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, lying lifeless among the carnage, taking with him 14 innocent lives. Today, a memorial stands squarely in front of the Edmond post office, erected in 1989 and designed by sculptor Richard Muno. The monument displays a man and woman holding a yellow ribbon atop a pool in which sits 14 separate fountains, one for each victim. At the time of its perpetration, the Edmond Post Office Massacre was considered the third deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. While not the first U.S. post office shooting, the Edmond incident certainly sticks out as one of the more violent cases. Likely a contributing event to the idiom "going postal." On December 17, 1993, the St. Petersburg Times newspaper would make the first official mention of the term "going postal," stating, "The symposium was sponsored by the U.S. Postal Service, which has seen so many outbursts that in some circles, excessive stress is known as going postal. 35 people have been killed in 11 post office shootings since 1983. The USPS does not approve of the term going postal and has made attempts to stop people from using the saying. As one might suppose, that is not an image anyone would want associated with their business." Following this, on December 31st, the Los Angeles Times further defined the phrase, referring to shooting up the office as going postal. The idiom likely originated well before reaching the press in the public square, but these two instances seem to be the first national reference. Lastly, the body of Patrick Sherrill is interred at the Watauga IOOF Cemetery, located in Blaine County, Oklahoma. I hope you've enjoyed today's brief overview of the Edmond Post Office Massacre. We are a small channel, so a like is greatly appreciated, and recommendations are always welcome. Again, I am no expert and never claim to be. Until next time, on Tipton Bros.